I'm Ryan Gresham, and this is Gun Talk Nation. This Gun Talk Nation is brought to you by Ruger, Rossi, SDS Imports, Stag Arms, Range Ready, and Crimson Trace. All right, welcome into Gun Talk Nation. You know, on this show, we cover kind of anything to do with guns, and I just like to talk to interesting people, and especially people who know stuff, know more than me. So we had this fella out at our place a few weeks back, and I said, I got to get him on the podcast. Bryan Eastridge, welcome in, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ryan. Appreciate it.
So you guys, American Fighting Revolver, right?
That's correct.
You and Daryl have this company, and we met. I'll tell people a little bit of the story of how this came about. I was at SHOT Show. We're at the Smith & Wesson little media event thing, and Chris, who it's really funny, Chris actually knows more people than he thinks he knows. It's like, hey, Bryan, hey, Daryl. He's like, they're really good guys. They really know their stuff. And if Chris says they're actually really good trainers, really know their stuff, I'm like, oh, cool. That's awesome. And then it kind of things, you know, then Jason Kloster from Lipsy's says, yeah, we're going to get them to come in and help out with the new J-Frame event thing with Smith & Wesson. And then you were at our place teaching. So I love it. So American Fighting Revolver, how do you describe that and how do you explain it to people?
Well, it's kind of multifaceted. AmericanFightingRevolver.com. We have a paywall resource site. It's in the vein of like a digital magazine.
Okay.
So we profile some vintage historical revolvers and pretty much stick with fighting revolvers, not necessarily hunting / recreational stuff. A lot of old law enforcement guns, and we profile guns from our collection and try to preserve some of that historical legacy. And then we also have a training facet of our company that we do the Pat Rogers Memorial Revolver Roundup out there at Gun Site. We do media events, kind of like we did down there at you guys' place for Lipsy's. And the main the main core component of it is our website and our digital article.
So why revolvers? What made you guys decide to focus in a niche of a niche? It's revolvers and it's fighting revolvers.
Right. Well, Daryl and I met about 6 years ago at an event, and he had heard I had a couple of kind of historical revolvers, and I had heard he did, and it just went from there.
Mutual weirdos.
Yeah. And we both grew up in law enforcement. I grew up on the competition side of shooting police pistol competitions with a revolver. And he actually went to a police academy and trained with revolvers. So.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I think revolvers, it seems like we have in the gun world right now, it feels like there is a little bit of a resurgence of what I call analog guns. Guns that you make the gun run. I mean, we saw that at SHOT Show. One of the big themes was a lot of new lever action guns. Smith & Wesson brought out theirs. Stag and Aero had their kind of tactical ones, and there were some others. And obviously revolvers fall into that, what I would call analog guns. You make the gun run. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think we're in a golden era right now with striker-fired platforms and polymer guns. Mm-hmm. I don't know where they go from here. I think they're as good as they've ever been. And I don't know how much room for innovation there is. I mean, granted, cosmetics and maybe features, but out of the box, you know, your core striker-fired guns, they're as good as they've ever been. Ammunition is as good as it's ever been. So I think the market is really flooded with a lot of those platforms. And that's not a knock. I mean, that's a good thing, right? People have access to really accurate, you know, user-friendly platforms without having to go to gunsmiths and all this other stuff to make them what they want.
Yeah, they're accurate and reliable right out of the box.
Yeah, and I grew up in the era when you had a revolver or you had a 1911, and then when the 9 millimeters came on the scene in like 86, 87, your choices were like Beretta, Sig, Ruger, and then the third gen Smith and Wesson autos.
And then some guy named Gaston changed a lot of this.
Yes, and that drove innovation. It was a bit of an arms race after that, right?
So to speak.
Yeah, literally and figuratively. So we saw revolvers just take a nosedive right there in the early 90s. And now but at the time, think about the time the market was flooded with 4-inch service revolvers and, the J-frame Chief Specials. That was just kind of the combination platter for American law enforcement and a lot of your American.
That's a good point. Yeah, you have so many departments switching over from revolvers to some semi-automatic platform. And yeah, that's a good point. Now it's like, okay, yeah, if you want a service revolver, you could, you'll probably stub your toe on one walking across the street. They're everywhere.
Yeah. So with that real paradigm shift in the LE world, the other thing I saw was, early 90s is when all the concealed carry permit stuff started to take off. Mm-hmm. So you started seeing legislation come in and people for the first time since like the 30s and 40s were able to go obtain a concealed carry permit. At the same time, the semi-autos were coming on strong. So a lot of the revolver interest just waned and died off. And now there's been this uptick, and I think a lot of it has to do with this younger generation finding how cool lever guns are and how cool revolvers are. And okay, I've got a pile of striker fired autos and they're polymer, but now we've even seen them throw back to alloy frames and things like that. So the innovation has kind of gone backwards, so to speak, in the format with technological upgrade. Yeah. So I think people just kind of got bored of them that's the best I can figure. And
I've said the same thing, Bryan. It's kind of like if you've become a gun enthusiast, and maybe you're not like myself or like you, where you grew up with it, your dad, your grandpa, your uncle, it was just, but if you're a 25-year-old guy and you go, whoa, guns are cool, started playing, I don't know, Call of Duty or whatever, and kind of got like, wait, I could own these and shoot them. And then they bought a Glock, and then they bought a Sig, and then they bought maybe a Smith & Wesson and another Glock and another Sig. At some point you go, okay, I got a bunch of striker-fired polymer handguns and maybe several different ARs, but that's basically like two platforms. You got some AR platforms and you got some semi-auto handguns. And then you go, what else is there?
Right. And, 2018, when my buddy Ernest Langdon got Beretta to release the 92 Elite LTT, the gun we had always wanted from Beretta. Mm-hmm. I mean, that train is still going. And, but some of the more purists like myself, we had already been tuned into those guns for years, and it just introduced them to like the next generation of shooter in a little better package. So, it's cycles and changes and turns, and I think we're kind of in the revolver turn again.
Yeah. It's fun to see.
It really is. And, I spent the better part of 10 years having to work on those guns and service them and, to compete with them. And I'd kind of put that knowledge over on the shelf and said, what am I ever going to do to know how to time a barrel on a Smith & Wesson? What good does that serve anybody? And all of a sudden people were coming out of the woodwork asking me about that. I went, I guess everybody forgot. And I'm pretty young in that age bracket. I think I'm going to be 45 this year, and people that I teach at Revolver Roundup are like, who's this kid?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so if to know how to time a revolver, um, generally you're going to go to somebody who definitely has his AARP card, and or honestly, at, there's a little bit of that knowledge is dying off. I mean, if you have some very knowledgeable gunsmiths or gun tinkerers, and they're getting older, right? And if the new gunsmith folks are like talking about doing gun builds, and they may not be messing around with revolvers. So it is a specialty knowledge thing. Bryan, let's take a quick break. When I come back, I want to talk about this new J frame and what you guys had a hand in it. And I also want to talk about training with a revolver and some tips there. You probably know Crimson Trace for laser grips. That is their bread and butter. They still make them, and they still are great. They work great. But they also make a lot of different lighting options. And one of the cooler ones they do is called the RIG, which stands for Rapid Illumination Grip. And it's kind of an angled foregrip to go on your AR-15. You know a vertical foregrip, right? But this one is a little bit angled, and it has a light built into it. You can run it with a switch. You can run it a few different ways. It's very cool, and it looks really good too. So go check it out at crimsontrace.com, the RIG Rapid Illumination Grip. Maybe you've thought about wanting an over and under shotgun. I mean, they're so pretty, they point so well, they just look so great. But I know a lot of times it's like, man, that's kind of pricey. You need to take a look at Spandau Arms from SDS Imports. If you go to sdsimports.com, you can look at Spandau is the brand, Spandau. Very cool, very nice over and unders, and they have a bunch of different levels. But even if you start out at the regular, I say regular, still very nice, Spandau Target Arm, or Arms Target. Nice gun. I mean, Turkish walnut, 12 gauge, 3-inch chambers. You can get it in a 32-inch barrel, a 30-inch barrel, or 28-inch barrel. Fiber optic front bead, mechanical triggers. They do a lot of nice features into this gun, and you'll be impressed at what you're going to buy this thing for. So go check them out at SDS Imports, Spandau Arms. Range Ready is where we do all our classes. RangeReadyStudios.com. And we've got a few coming up that you might want to take a look at. AR-15 classes, pistol classes. But the big deal is, I'll be honest, we're getting ready to launch a bunch of new classes for the rest of the year that are not on the schedule yet. And you can be the first to sign up and find out about these things. Go to RangeReadyStudios.com, sign up for the email, and you'll be the first to know, because these do sell out really quickly. So, Bryan, a few weeks back, you guys came down to Range Ready Studios, the Gun Talk headquarters, with Lipsy's, the gun distributor, if people listening don't know, and Smith & Wesson. And Lipsy's and Smith & Wesson did a partner deal to bring out a new, updated, upgraded J-frame snubby revolver, which really cool. Everybody was excited about it. You guys had a hand in it. Talk about what it is and what were some of the changes that you guys decided to put into that.
Yeah, so Jason Klossner, who we had met on another consulting project with another manufacturer, and we hit it off. We were like, man, we speak the same language. We talk about the same stuff. And all three of us are very like-minded. Well, he calls us in October and said, hey, I need your help with a super secret special project. And if for those that don't know, Lipsy's is, I think, the largest when it comes to just guns, wholesale distributor probably in the world now, right? And they work with manufacturers to bring out special edition guns or exclusive guns that only they send to their dealers. And we didn't even know what the gun was. We had no idea. And we got a call on a Tuesday, and it was like, hey, can you be in Baton Rouge Thursday? Like, hey, we're both retired. Okay, let's go. So we show up, and they unveil this J-frame. And the interesting thing with consulting, if you've ever been involved in it, a lot of companies don't want you to tell them their baby is ugly. They don't want to hear the bad, right? And Jason was 180 degrees different. He says, I want you to tell me everything we need to fix on this gun. And of course, Andrew Gore from Smith & Wesson was there as their product manager.
Mm-hmm.
And we made 3 really distinct changes right in the 11th hour. And Jason, and he said it on a couple other podcasts, he said, man, I don't want to get the ball to the 5-yard line and fumble. I want this to be everything that we can possibly make it. So we pivoted on the cosmetics. My little contribution on that was the 642s keep the black hardware with the grips that were like charcoal gray. Daryl and I both, I was like, the sight's kind of suboptimal, the front sight. And we made a color change on that, which if you know anything about manufacturing, one change like that sets an entire chain of events in motion, right?
There's meetings and meetings. You wouldn't, people listening to this go, you just pick some sites. No, man, you're talking about lots of meetings because you have supplier issues. Is it going to fit? Is it going to look right? Is it the right size? Just so many different factors. Yeah.
And fortunately they'd worked the math out. So it was just the color. It just wasn't right. So Daryl goes, man, I need this like the ugliest, nastiest, brightest green you can make it. And phone call to Excess Sights. Hey, what's the greenest sight you have? Well, we got this new paint in. And that's another thing people don't understand is, the manufacturer of those sights buys the paint from a vendor, so that chain of events can take a lot of time. But they were really quick to pivot. And then VZ grips, the original set of stocks that we put on that, or that we had on those guns, they looked good. They felt good. And when we shot them, we were like, this has got to go. These go back to the boot grips, do anything but these because they hurt. And now, not to say they're not a quality stock or any of that. It just, the design for a 38 was suboptimal.
Yeah. The grips weren't bad grips. It was just, you wanted a different style. So, and I ought to say, because people are, what you guys are talking about. Okay. So it's a special gun that comes from Lipsy's. So if people are, I'll just skip ahead for a moment. If you're interested in this, you want to see it, maybe you want to purchase it, whatever it might be. It comes from Lipsy's, who is a gun distributor. So your gun dealer, and that could be a big box like a Bass Pro, or it could be your down the road Bob's Gun Shop guy. They just have to call Lipsy's and order the gun. But you can go to lipsysguns.com and see it. It's called the Smith & Wesson Ultimate Carry J-Frame. There's a lot here, and some of the cool things, you guys worked on the grip, the high horn VZ grip, which makes it more comfortable to shoot. We're talking about a little bitty revolver. So the grips and the grip style and grip angle and all that stuff matters a whole lot. Making it, again, easier to shoot, pinned XS tritium front sight with a green ring. Some people might have heard us say this before. Green shows up to the human eye a little bit easier and better than some other colors. Now I think, Bryan, that kind of depends on the person. I think guys can be a little bit more colorblind. Some people like orange, some people like a gold, but generally green really jumps out, right?
Yeah, and I have the weird rods and cones where green takes me a second to pick up, but that color is so unique that even I pick it up pretty quick. And, if you go into optics, like I don't pick up green optics very well at all. So, on an optic mounted gun, I tend to stick with red. But this green is like some futuristic lime green. It just jumps. Yeah. There's really nothing like in nature or clothing dye that really looks like it. So it's pretty prominent.
For sure. I shot it. It's fantastic. And it's also, means that you can swap it out, right? I mean, it's not a fixed, this is it. This is all you can have on it. It's pinned. So one of the other things is the dovetailed, U-notch rear sight has, to me, sometimes with those little snubbies, I really love snubby revolvers, but I'm always having to go, oh gosh, I have to bury that front sight. I keep forgetting I got to bury the front sight. And this sight picture to me feels more like the same sight picture at other guns that I shoot.
Yeah, if you look back in the archives, and I've got some really old vintage J-frames, bodyguards, and Centennials with a grip safety and things like that. The sights on the 642 and the 442, when they relaunched those, I think in the early 90s, they didn't change that much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the width of the front sight changed a little bit. And then there really wasn't a sight innovation, a drastic one, until they released the 340 M&P, which that's a gun I carry a lot. And it had a U kind of in the gutter of the frame. And they used a high vis front sight that you would drop in there like a ball, and it worked really. It was really effective, but the rear sight was still suboptimal. I'll say it wasn't bad. It wasn't as good as it could be. And to make it any better, they needed to go to a dovetailed rear sight, which they had done on a previous model, but hadn't really spent a whole lot of time zeroing that to certain ammo.
Okay.
So, and that was the other thing that Daryl and I came in to do, was really verify, do these sights work with your commonly available defensive ammo?
It sounds like there were several, these things existed out there. Then, like, over maybe a few decades, Smith had done little elements of this. But you guys being revolver experts and revolver historians, you go, this sight or sight picture, when you did it that for those 3 years back then, that was great. This grip was great, but you never put them all together. What I don't want to forget to say this. This is the other part. Another one of those things that you guys did it this one time, and it was great. You can get it in a 5-shot 38 Special Plus B, but you can also get it in a 6-shot 32 H&R Magnum, which it seems like that's one of the things that people are just so pumped about.
Yeah, and that's a cartridge that's been out a while.
Mm-hmm.
It had been put in Smith & Wesson J-frames before in the past, and they were commanding premiums on the secondhand market.
I always think that that's a clue for gun makers. Like, look, if you go out there to Gunbroker, Colt Python being a good example of recent, like, these guns that you don't make anymore are commanding a premium. People want them.
Yeah. And the 432 and 332 and some of the other, like the Scandium guns that they had chambered in that cartridge, they were bringing astronomical prices on the secondhand market. I don't know how this new release has affected some of those guys that paid too much, but
sorry.
But the big benefit is 32 long and 32 H&R. It reminds me in this semi-auto world of like 38 Super, right? Mm-hmm. Where you can go from a really light, fast bullet to a heavier, slow bullet and all points in between. There's just a wide variety of load capability out there. And you get 20% more cartridge capacity just by going to that cartridge. Yeah. And it really hits on the rimfire like capability for recoil, like shooting 22 Magnum, maybe a little more, but not a whole lot.
Yeah.
But center fire reliability. So
I think it's when we all shot it and you go back and forth, and I will say the 38 was still very comfortable to shoot. But when you shoot the 32, you feel like, yeah, I wouldn't say like, oh, it feels like a 22, but it kind of almost does. You go, boy, it's just so comfortable to shoot it. And the people might go, well, then it doesn't have much power, but that's not the case. It actually is very close ballistically, especially with certain loads, to a 38 Special.
Yeah, and I think we could go down the propeller headed path of cross sectional density and all the whatever, but I think that reduced surface area on the front allows it to have as good on the penetration side as 38 Special. And if you look at the velocities, when you get that 32 long or 32 H&R, when you keep it around 800 feet per second, in a lot of ways, it pays more dividends than a 5-shot 38. It's easier to shoot. The velocities are a little higher than some of the 38 in that platform. And then that 32 caliber bullet just seems to do some magic. And but if we go back to like the 20s and 30s, Smith & Wesson made a 32 long regulation police. Mm-hmm. That wasn't by accident. There were a lot of cops that carried that until the 38s gained prominence with the military and police that we all love as the K-frame Model 10, right?
Right.
So yeah, and I think it's kind of the same example of what we're seeing now, this resurgence in 32. Something killed off 32 years ago, and then H&R came out, and then something just kind of buried it. And now we've kind of gone back to that and seen all the benefits of it.
327 Federal had its day in the sun for a while, which is, look, it's a great cartridge. But maybe just gave some credence to just 32s, right? I don't know. So I want to make sure we get into this, because not only are people getting an interest in revolvers because, this is kind of a fun platform. Maybe it's something that you don't own already, but I mean, you and Daryl are both trainers, and your background in competitive shooting, you guys teach classes, and shooting a revolver is a little bit different than shooting a semi-auto handgun that people are used to. Maybe they have more experience with. Are there some things when you start teaching that are specific to revolvers? What are some tips and tricks if somebody's like, hey, just got my first revolver, I've been shooting other guns, like what are some of your top 2, 3, 4 different things that you tell folks?
Well, the big one is keeping the gun loaded, right? Keeping the gun fed.
Yep.
So, and you can kind of equate that to like shotguns and lever guns. You're kind of capacity limited.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to be able to manipulate the gun and be able to keep it loaded. And there's a lot of technique in that. And the other marksmanship factors, they're not that much different. The trigger is the big, everybody thinks, oh man, this trigger, it's long and it's heavy and it's this and it's that.
Mm-hmm. Double action, longer pull, all that.
Right. They tend to be a little heavier than our striker fired semi-autos. But once you learn the technique, and a lot of that's, trigger finger placement and how you pace moving that device to make it go bang, it's really not that big of a leap. And, if we look at the semi-auto version, if you look at a double action first shot or a DASA gun, it's really similar to the first trigger press on a DASA gun.
Sure. Yeah, it's a double action. You're pulling the hammer back, and in a revolver, obviously double action, you're pulling the hammer, cylinders turning at the same time. So I think in general, I mean, we could probably find 10 people that give us 10 different opinions on this, but as far as trigger placement goes, I mean, on a regular handgun, a semi-auto handgun, basically that first pad of your index finger is where the trigger should fall. I know some people will say in revolvers, right there in that first joint on your trigger finger. I mean, what's your take on it? Where should they be?
Put as much as you can. That's kind of my theory. The other piece of that a lot of people discount with revolvers, everybody's hands are different, right? So
sure.
On a semi-auto, it's only been in the last about 10 years that we've had the ability to change a backstrap. And I would ask people like, why do you change the backstrap on a semi-auto? And they're like, oh, it feels better or it feels different. And the true answer is it's to change the distance from your trigger finger to the web of your hand. That's the that's the only valid reason that you should do that. Well, on a revolver, we've had the ability to do that since like 1890 something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just by putting different stocks on the gun. So that's very stock dependent. But the way I shoot is I put all the finger I can on the trigger as long as I can move it straight back to get as much leverage on it as I can.
So it's not making it a lighter trigger, but it makes it a little bit easier to pull it.
It's more leverage versus lighter trigger, right?
Yeah. And what about pulling through, prepping the trigger, all that stuff?
Yeah, prepping the trigger on a revolver, like whipping the cylinder to the next cartridge and staging it, it's a really good way to have mechanical issues down the road. They're really not meant to be fired that way. We say it's, and I'll give all the credit to Daryl on this, it's a lot like paddling a canoe. Is once you've made the decision to shoot, you're going to make a smooth paddle, right? You're not going to try to rush through it. And then when we reset the trigger, we're taking the paddle out of the water and as fast as we can getting back to where we need to make another paddle stroke, right?
That's a great way to put it. And you don't want to half stroke it if you're on the canoe, right? I mean, if you're going to do it, you got to do it. If you want something that's your own, that's a little bit custom, check out aeroprecision.com. aeroprecisionusa.com, I should say. They're really good at helping you build your own AR. And one of the cool things they do are their monthly builder sets. A March 2024 builder set right now, it's a complete set where it's very cool, unique, custom paint jobs on these. So you got to go check it out to see what I'm talking about. But you build one of these, everyone at the range is going to go, dude, what is that? Very cool way to get started. They have all the parts you need, and they even have the information there as well. aeroprecision.com for your gun builds. Ruger American Rifles, they've been doing it for several years now. The secret's out. It's like a value-priced gun that shoots way better than it should. Well, they just released the Ruger American Rifle Gen 2, so they've kind of updated it. They've put some extra things into it that people were asking for. Splatter finish stock, which provides some nice grip, but it also kind of looks cool. You can do an install low comb, so height adjustment, you can adjust for magnified optics, 3-position tang safety, oversized bolt handle, Cerakote coating. They have them fluted barrels. Go check them out over at Ruger.com. The new Ruger American Rifle Gen 2. Rossi, known for quality firearms at a pretty good price. One of their new ones is the RP63. This is a revolver, rugged rubberized grip, fixed rear sight, replaceable front sight, stainless steel, 357 mag, 3-inch barrel, 6 shots. Okay, MSRP on this is $469, which is a screaming great deal, and it's a good-looking gun. Go check it out at Rossi USA. Their new RP63 revolver.
The other benefit of a revolver is, and I've seen this countless times in law enforcement, there are times that a situation changes inside of a trigger press.
Sure.
And with a revolver, you've got some time for forgiveness in there if you need to get out of the press. So
that's an interesting way to put it. And that's something that Chris will talk about in the classes is like, and this kind of, I think, boggles some people's minds when they haven't thought about it. Because if you've been taught you don't touch the trigger, well, you don't even draw your gun unless you intend to fire it, which is not true. You don't touch the trigger unless you intend to fire the gun, also not true. It's possible to actually be in the process of pressing the trigger and decide defensively, I don't need to shoot this person, or law enforcement, I don't need to shoot, right? It's not like too late. I started pressing the trigger. I have to just keep pressing it. Revolver gives you a fudge factor.
It does, and that's not to say that striker fired autos are bad or something like that, but there's a training difference there that I think revolvers have a little bit of a benefit. Just kind of like I mentioned it earlier. I'm a big DASA fan too. And the distance that trigger moves, and I credit this to Ernest Langdon, is it's not the weight of it, it's the distance that you have to move it. And there's it gives you a lot of buffer time there. It may be, hundredths of a second to really finalize your decision. And so you've got a fair amount of forgiveness built in. And the other piece is when you reset a revolver trigger, that trigger is fighting your finger to go back to the reset point. Whereas some of your striker fired autos, the trigger returns a little. It's there, but
soft.
we just kind of accept it's there. We don't.
Yeah.
Which trigger reset? I think that argument gets blown out of proportion. But with a revolver, that spring is pushing your finger off of it. So
I won't say the words forced reset, but I'm just saying
pretty darn close.
Reset. It's funny. I haven't thought about that, but that's actually what you're seeing in more of the aftermarket triggers for Glocks and M&Ps. They actually, if you get into that trigger talk with some of the trigger manufacturers, that's something that they're trying to put in there is a bit of more of it, like a really pronounced reset and pronounced spring action of resetting the trigger.
Right.
Let's copy that old revolver thing.
Let's copy that 1890s, 1870s design and figure out how to put that in, right?
That is funny. Jeez, man. So how do people find out more about what you guys are up to?
Well, we have Facebook and Instagram, of course. If you type in American Fighting Revolver, you'll find us. The big one, if you want to get a hold of us, AmericanFightingRevolver.com. And that's our landing page for all things training, articles. We even have in our article setup, if you do say American Handgunner or one of our like Eric Gelhaus, our buddy today, they release an article that we think applies, then we'll hyperlink that article and it's not behind the paywall. It's just kind of a landing page where you can find information on it. But AmericanFightingRevolver.com is the hub. And then Rumble. I'm doing kind of a weekly, every other week, podcast, kind of like we're doing here.
Cool.
We're all bring people in and just do a Zoom interview about something revolver related. So, and that's
very cool.
AFR_official on Rumble.
Okay, good. All right, last question, because I knew you said earlier you have a lot of revolvers. Favorite weird, old, different kind of revolver, one that jumps out at you?
Oh man, there's so many. Right, that's Pandora's box, Ryan. That's a terrible.
Picking between my kids here.
Yeah. So in my collection, I've got vintage, modern, heirloom guns. My favorite configuration of a revolver is a 3-inch K-frame. So whether it's a Model 10, a Model 13, whatever, 3-inch fixed sight Model 10. And that was the last configuration issued to the FBI, 3-inch Model 13. So there's just some magic between the 3-inch guns and a K-frame, so that's hands down, that's my favorite configuration.
That's one of those, that configuration is one of those guns. When people pick it up, they tend to just shoot it well. Like, why do I like this? Why do I shoot it well? I don't know. It's magic.
It is. And there's a lot of pros. I mean, you can dive into the weeds on the ejector rod length, the barrel length, all that stuff, but they just feel good. And people, like you said, people tend to, they pick the gun up and it balances well. K-frames are notorious for having a fantastic action. So it's kind of the in-betweener that fits checks all the blocks for me.
Very cool. Man, thanks for being with us. This has been fun.
Appreciate it.
All right, guys, that's it for us. Go check them out. American Fighting Revolver. We'll see you next time on Gun Talk Nation.